My friends, welcome to the latest edition of Here's What We Know, the podcast of unexpected conversations. Ooh, we're going to have a good one today. But before we get into it, I want to, again, thank my sponsors who make all this possible, because without them, this is not happening. And you really want to be a part of some of these fun shows like today. I'm going to give it a shot. Are you ready? I'm going to say, Ganesh Venkataramanan.
That's
nowhere near it. Venkataramanan.
The first one was better. But
Venkataramanan.
Venkataramanan.
Ramanan. See, I lost one.
There's one syllable less. But what you said was actually a common name. It's just that mine has one extra syllable.
Well, see, as I told you when you first came up, I have no fear, because I will not be the first nor the last to mispronounce anybody's last name or first name, for that matter.
So my name is kind of like Bob Smith in India. It's pretty common, but if you're not used to Indian names, then it's long.
Well, yeah, and and there's so many syllables. Like, it's German, right? Germans have they have a 9-syllable word for the word bottle, right? But to them, it's like, well, why wouldn't you say, make a shank? You know, and in English, we have the different thing. We have words that are spelled the same, said differently, mean different things.
That's true.
Like tear and tear.
Right.
Spelled exactly the same way.
Right.
Pronounced totally different with completely different meanings.
Right.
How anybody learns to speak English is beyond my pay scale. Because it's the most confusing, weird language that really doesn't think about the lack of rules we have in English.
Like what?
I just showed you. Right? Mm-hmm. That you can have different words. You can have words that mean kind of the same thing, but be spelled the same way, or spelled completely different, but sound the same.
Right.
We just don't have any rhyme or reason for it. Right? And even our spelling, I before E, except after C, except for these words.
Right. Exactly. I know.
So, and you're from the world of science. Come on, English has just got to be. If you really sit back and thought about it, you go, really?
Yeah. Who makes a rule? Who has a job where their goal is to come up with a rule which says I before E except after C?
And oh, by the way, there's exceptions to the job.
Yeah,
there's exceptions to the rule.
Right. Exactly.
So that's all I'm saying is that we don't have any, I did this. My son asked me this one day. He goes, Dad, why do we say one and not one?
Good question.
Okay. And I'm like, I do not know the answer to that. And I'm an English lit major. So I said, I'm going to find out. So I researched it. You know why?
Why?
We as a society decided uno, we adopt everything from different languages. So like Spanish, unos, dos, tres,
right.
We as a society decided to pronounce one, O-N-E, as one. There's no rules. We as a society decided to adopt it as close as we could to the uno, or the Spanish version. So uno became one. But there's no reason behind it. There's no other word. And people like to say, well, if you say Ouija, no, Ouija is O-U-I-J-A. There's vowels and stuff.
Right.
O-N-E should never be one.
Right.
We have a little sidetrack, Ganesh, which is what I do.
Right. Mine are sidetrack, yeah.
I just get sidetracked because you get me going on this. But let's get back to your story.
Okay.
When I heard about this journey you've been on, it floored me. I'm like, okay. And they're like, do you want to speak to Ganesh? And I'm like, there's no way I don't want to. There's nothing about his story that I don't want to hear. And I literally was having a conversation this morning with a friend of mine. And I mentioned a little bit of what's going on as far as you. And his first thing was, when does that episode come out? And I'm like, I'll let you know. It'll be coming out.
I feel all this pressure on me now to say something sensible. So let's hope for the best.
Yeah. Listen. If it only blows up and die, it ruins both of our reputation. But don't worry.
True.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
What's the worst that could happen other than us losing our reputation, livelihood, and everything else? What's the worst that could happen?
Exactly.
Let me see if I can. I just want to get you started.
Okay.
And then let you tell the story. You were born into the Hindi faith. Is that right? Hindu faith.
Yeah.
See?
The faith is Hindu, language is Hindi.
Okay. Because I need you to know this, and I tell everybody this. Don't ever worry about correcting me. It does not offend me at all. It's the only way I can ever learn. All right?
Okay.
So please, anytime I get something wrong, call me on it.
Yeah.
Right off the bat. Okay. I'm going to, now, because your story is better than anything I can tell. Please begin.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Hindu faith, which is very complex, I would say. The core doctrine of it was probably not obvious to me going through junior high and high school and so on. I have to admit, I probably didn't spend that much time in high school trying to figure out what the faith actually said, like most high schoolers, But actually I had a great upbringing, great parents, I don't have any of the sob stories growing up, no drugs, no alcohol, our biggest challenge was we learned multiple languages, going back to our earlier conversation. So I like to say, I speak 3 languages. My wife speaks 3. Our only common one is English, and my daughter speaks 2 besides English. She actually speaks Spanish and Korean, and my son speaks Spanish. And so we love languages, and but that was the biggest challenge growing up, is just all these languages and rules and I before E except after C, But when I went to college, I found myself surrounded by some really smart people, and I went to a very smart college, which makes you wonder why they let me in. But but I was surrounded by lots of very smart, very analytical people, and without knowing why and without there being a real good reason for it, I became an atheist. And surrounded by atheists, I think a lot of professionals, a lot of analytical people, it's very easy for them to be an atheist, because the world of faith doesn't seem to interact or intersect with the world of science as they see it, And so I became an atheist through that process. And I like to joke and say I didn't use my brains on the way to being an atheist, but I had to use them on the way out.
I like that.
So this was, maybe when I was 17 or so when I went to college. I started becoming an atheist. I was an atheist for 10 years, roughly. And but if you had asked me why I was an atheist and what was my core doctrine as an atheist, what did I believe, right? Or what did I not believe, and why I was an atheist, I don't think I would have had strong arguments for being an atheist. I find, again, this is a general observation, that most atheists don't have a strong argument on why they are an atheist. They just have maybe very good questions for other people, right? Who may be of different faiths. When I was 27, I came across some people who I thought had done very well professionally. They were entrepreneurs. They were very successful in what they did. And so I was at that age where primarily the thing which mattered to me was being successful, and finances was one part of it, right? Certainly, I think in your 20s, that's what people think about quite a bit, right? So I looked at them as successful, and the 2 of them led me to Christ. Now I was not looking for Christ. I was looking for dollar bills, right? I was looking to make money and be successful, but I chanced upon Christ in a sense, And what it was they appealed to my sense of reasoning and the fact that I am an engineer and I am a scientist and I like understanding things. I mean, faith is actually a hard word for me because it's very hard to step out without knowing why I'm stepping out,
Mhm.
and so, but they led me through that process where I realized actually there was a huge intersection between science and faith, but it's not something which is discussed very well outside of some corners of academia, maybe. And so a lot of people do think that they're two different worlds, you know. And so, so along the way, I became a Christian.
Mhm.
Um, and probably the biggest thing which I found, which really struck me as a scientist looking at religion and Christ, is the fact that the universe had a beginning, right? Now I'm a Christian. I don't know. Actually, Gary, you and I have never did talk about where you
I'm a
come from.
Christian also,
Okay.
just so you know.
Yeah.
I wear my faith on my sleeve, and
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a fervent, if you want to be truthful about it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So I will start with my favorite words, favorite Bible verses, if I could. And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And that right there, Genesis 1:1, right? First
Mhm.
words of the Bible. And the Jews and the Christians who followed the what we call the Old Testament were the only ones who believed that the universe had a beginning, because it says there right there in Genesis 1:1. Nobody else did. Everybody else thought that the universe had always existed. You know, it wasn't until the mid maybe 1915 or so that Einstein came up with this theory of relativity, and to his surprise, his theory predicted a expanding universe. Right. Now, being a scientist, he like all scientists felt this pressure of confirming. I suspect. Okay, this is partly my conspiracy theory.
I love me a good conspiracy theory. You
Right.
need to know
Right.
that.
That's part of being a Christian, I think.
Yeah.
And so he fudged his equations to show a static universe rather than an expanding universe. And you are in the Bay Area, right? So it was the Hubble, Edwin Hubble, and the Hubble telescope, which actually showed evidence that the galaxies were shifting away from us, and they showed a redshift. And it was amongst the evidence which convinced Einstein that the actually his theory was right. He was predicting an expanding universe outside of the fact that he was fudging it to keep it static. Right. Now, he had a very complex relationship with religion, and it's hard to know what he believed in it came to God. But it's not about Einstein. It's his theory, right? His theory was saying it's an expanding universe, right? So if you look at an expanding universe, well, yesterday then it was smaller than it is today. And then you go back long enough in time, you say you come to a singularity. You come to a single point out of which everything must have expanded, which created all kinds of problems for science. It's like, now you have the problem of not just how things happened, but why did this happen, right? So my favorite example is to say, what you hear is here is a little bang, and it's not enough to say that the little bang happened because my hand came in contact with the surface of the desk, but it's because I chose to smack the desk, right? Now, if we need an explanation for the little bang, then don't we need an explanation for the big bang, which goes beyond the physics and the plasma and the theory of relativities and everything else, to say, why was there a big bang? And why did it happen at that instant in time? The ironic thing about Einstein's prediction was he was not only predicting that space started at that time, he was also predicting that time itself started at that time. So there was nothing before that, in a sense, right? Now, as a Christian, there is a word for that, and it's called eternal. Right now, we think of eternal in the future, but there is the idea of there being no time, timelessness is exists, right? So I started looking at it. I said, "There's some, if it is indeed true that the universe had a beginning just by itself, I don't have any other answer to any other question.
Yeah.
But if the universe had a beginning, it had to have a beginner, somebody who started. And the process of the universe coming into being was not a simple process. It wasn't just like fireworks show on July 4th and something blew up and boom, you got an universe, right? It was a what we call a low entropy process, meaning it was highly organized. I'm a chemical engineer, and the second law of thermodynamics talks about entropy always going in the direction of higher chaos and higher disorder in a sense. The initial starting point was super low disorder, super well organized, and so this process of the Big Bang was actually really well organized. And now you say, how does that happen in a random way? Right. And so then, nothing good happens in a random way. Right.
Yeah.
You look at the bookshelf behind me. If I let it up to randomness, it doesn't organize itself. Right. And so the fact that it was all well organized, started to give some hints about not only there being a creator, right, but also what kind of creator he is, that he was beyond time, right? The thing which struck me as a scientist and engineer was he's really smart. He could solve a lot of differential equations in his head and get this going.
Amen.
Isn't it amazing that the physics we see can be described by the math we understand? Right?
Yeah, it's beyond that. To me, when you talk about the creation, I had an MIT physicist on one time, and he kind of went through the same journey you did. That the more he studied it, the more he's like, this can't be random.
Right.
And his assertion to me that he thinks one of the most incorrectly used words in the English language is random.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, random is incredibly rare.
Exactly.
It's incredibly rare,
yes.
Right? That we can sit back and not realize the pattern, but just because we don't realize the pattern doesn't mean it's random. Right? And so when you go into those effects, when you sit back and think about all of the things, and you've heard this argument, you've heard not even an argument, you've heard people sit back and say before, especially in the scientific world, it takes just as much faith to believe that the matter of the entire universe was in an infinitesimal spot, beyond what we could see. And it expanded we even have the math now to show what the temperature was within a millionth of a second of it happening. It takes that much faith to go, I can use the science all the way up to this point, but after that, well, I'm just not going to think about it.
Right.
And that's literally what they do. That I'm just not going to think about it. I'm not going to ask that question. And when you say Einstein had a complicated thing, when Einstein was asked string theory, what was his famous quote? God doesn't make mistakes. Right? So he kind of had a thing. And when it comes to like the Newton law of thermodynamics and stuff, Isaac Newton had a deep faith. A deep faith.
So if I can touch a little bit on Isaac Newton, right? He is probably one of the first that we would call a scientist, right? And his science was based on the fact that we are made by an intelligent God, because he read his Genesis, right? And said, if we are created by an intelligent God, we expect the life around us to be intelligent and for us to be able to study it. So the foundation of a scientific study, and really the foundation of science itself, was a belief that God created the universe. So then we went on from Newton to other people, Boyle and other people who also saw the same thing. They saw science as a way to glorify God because they saw that it led to God. You could understand his person we can understand his person by reading the Bible. That's one way, but you can understand God also by looking at his creation. Right. And the book of nature, in a sense, was a book which was given to us to also read to understand the nature of God. So they saw science and which is why, science had been tried many times in many civilizations around the world. They all kind of didn't last very long until they based it on the belief that it was created by an intelligent God. And so then continued from that, and that led to the science and technology that we know today.
Fascinating. I just get so fascinated by it about, one of the things that guy was saying was about is random. He goes, you look at life. Life is never random. Life is never random. Life is the most complex pattern, rule-filled thing that you'll ever see, you'll ever study.
Right.
If you truly study life, it is the utmost. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. Life does not do D to M,
Right.
right? So there has to be some kind of mechanism where it all came through. And I always love it. With the technology we have today, we have yet to find even microbial life that's not on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, much less. I mean, my sons. I have young sons, and they'll ask me, "Do you think there's life out there?" And I'm like, "Life? Yes, I think there's life out there. Now, intelligent life,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We can't even prove microbial life right
Yeah,
now."
exactly. I mean, we're not even trying to find microbial life. What we're trying to find is there water on other planets, right? And if we have water, maybe there's a chance that there's life. So we are nowhere close to, detecting life anywhere, or even intelligent life or any life. Our best bet at this point is, can we find another planet whose temperature doesn't vary so much that it just, burns up everything or freezes everything, and where there's water, there is a reasonably constant temperature, there's a weather patterns, there's all these 100 different things
You need to have a moon,
yeah, you need to
and
have
yet you have to have a moon that creates, surface tension.
right, the tides, right?
Mhm.
How the movements of salts happen around the planet. So the number of rules you need are long. There's actually a really good book called The Lonely Planet, which talks about this. And after going through all the things you need for there to be life on any planet, they came to the conclusion, as far as they know, there's only one planet which has it. Happens to be ours, and we don't know who's they're even likely candidates anywhere else.
You saw that because they did it. They had a supercomputer run a program, and the supercomputer ran, and they said the amount of planets in the Milky Way planet galaxy with intelligent life, the supercomputer spit out one. That's how many billions, if not trillions, of things that had to happen. When you look at our solar system, what we're finding is most of our solar system is kind of unique. Most every other solar system, the gas giants revolve around the sun, and the rocky planets are cold little ice balls, right? So it's and that is the most common thing we find,
Right.
and we find them with the red dwarf stars,
Right.
who are unfortunately astronomically radioactive. That
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the part that most people don't understand. It's not that the sun is easy to forget the earth. The sun itself is extremely rare in the
Uh-huh.
amount of energy output it puts out, and that doesn't blow up with all this radiation just bathing everything around it, right? So it's actually extremely hard to find anything like what we have. There's a sun which is very, reasonably constant in its output of light, and a planet which is far enough away that it doesn't burn up, and close enough that it doesn't freeze like Mars does. Like you said, has a moon, has tides, has something like Jupiter protecting it from the
Exactly.
debris
You
coming.
got to have a Jupiter to wipe everything out. And as we were saying, I mean, Jupiter was, from the latest theory, from what I've read, is that they thought Jupiter was working its way toward the sun when Saturn and Uranus and Neptune pulled it back out. And they tried their best to disprove that, but the math keeps showing this is the only way things could have happened the way they are. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like somebody figured that Jupiter needed to be here for things to happen, and so we need these other these other two gas giants with three gas giants to have enough. I mean, the amount of what had to happen.
Right.
And again, I know we're talking in trillions of numbers, but even in the trillion of number things, that's rare.
Right. And this is back to your point. This is why I don't like randomness as a theory. Really, what randomness says to me, if somebody proposes that something happened randomly, and this happens in evolutionary theory all the time, when they say something happens randomly, that to me is saying you haven't given me an explanation. Because what is the difference between not having an explanation and saying it happened randomly? To me, it's the same thing. You haven't given an explanation. So randomness is not an explanation. I'm not saying random things cannot happen, but it's not an explanation on which you can base your science.
Well, that's what we were talking about earlier when we said random is rare.
Yeah.
Random is so rare that you can't, and you're exactly right. It turns into a way of trying to close a discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of opening it.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because if you want to go random, and now if you want to start the conversation there, okay, I'm in. I'm happy to go, wow, did this and why did this and how did that? But if you just go, yeah, well, that's just random.
Right.
What are we doing with that?
Yeah. You cannot study it because you cannot repeat it because it's random. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you haven't told me anything in terms of a cause. Right. And that's what I'm trying to find out. It's a science of causes, right? What causes things to happen. And randomness is not a good explanation in my opinion.
I told you it was going to be a fascinating conversation. I told you. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back with Ganesh, and I'm not even going to try anymore because I don't want to offend him. I'm right back on Here's What We Know.
If you're looking for Western wear, you need to find Winchester Western Wear at 1185 South Bascom Avenue in San Jose. You're not going to find the perfect outfit at the mall or the outlets. Come to the place with over 40 years of experience and all the top name brands like Ariat, Justin, Stetson, Tony Lama, and more. When you go to the great country shows at Shoreline, SAP, Club Rodeo, or Clola Shans, you'll be looking your best, from boots to hats to everything in between, with a knowledgeable staff that'll make the entire experience a fun one. Find them online at winchesterww.com. That's winchesterww.com. Or put this in your maps, 1185 South Bascom Avenue in San Jose. Winchester Western Wear. They'll help you find a look you love. Let's talk about the inevitable. End of life. Once I leave this earth, I can't do anything for my loved ones, but I've just learned by pre-planning a funeral or cemetery in advance takes the guesswork out when death occurs suddenly and your mind is clouded with grief. Dignity Memorial can help. My friend Tina Skurla pre-plans funeral and cemetery arrangements so loved ones don't have to. They're North America's largest provider of funeral, cremation, and cemetery services. They're dedicated to getting every detail right, and they do that by listening to you. I know it's a hard subject, but I also know we all see the sense and value of what Dignity Memorial does. Use the promo code Gary to get 25% off at Willow Glen Funeral Home. Reach out to my friend Tina Skurla today. She's committed to helping families not go through the tragedy of loss alone. Click on the link, use the promo code Gary, or email her at dmppatinaskurla.com, or call 408-398-7050.
So it is a fascinating journey that you went on, because you Hindu, and then you went through the atheistic thing. Now, I was raised in a conservative Christian home to the point where it was so fundamental that I pulled away as soon as I had a chance to pull away, right? And I kind of, not that I never disavowed my faith, but I certainly didn't embrace it. And then a number of years ago, I started setting back in my own personal journey, going, let me just look at it. Let me take a look at it. And, well, let me try to live by some of these principles. And what I found, and this is non-scientific, but it is to me, the more I adhered to the principles, the better life got. That it was, I think people realize, I'm not here to judge anybody. Matter of fact, Jesus says straight up, you without sin cast the first stone, right? And even when he told the woman after that, people forget that part. Neither do I judge you. Go and sin no more. Right. To me, that, I don't know if there's a bigger phrase in the Bible than that. But what he's told her is, here's a way for you to live a better life. And so that has, the more I've embraced it, as I tell my sons, I got to live the majority of my life as the most selfish person you'll ever meet. My first thought was me. My last thought was me. And now I am 5th, 6th, 7th on the list, depending on the day.
Right.
And the farther down I get on the list, the happier I get.
Exactly. right? Because our calling is to have Christ as the center of our life, not us, right? It's a call to sacrifice, right? Which sounds like a bad idea until one lives there and then says, actually, this is a lot more fun than being focused on me the whole time. Jesus says in Luke 9:23, he says, if you want to be with me, deny yourself, carry your cross daily, and then follow me, right? So denying ourselves is core, and I think it means deny ourselves in a somewhat of a Christian perspective, not a little bit of a Buddhist perspective, right?
Yeah.
I cannot deny my existence. The more I try, the more I focus on the one I deny, right? But it is to simply not spend that much time thinking about ourselves and taking that time to think about others and putting other people in front of us, right? It's not easy to do only because we get tempted to go back to ourselves. We're born with sinful natures and that drags us back. But it's a lot more meaningful and it's a lot more joyful to do that, right? It's just that I can't speak for you, but I wish I did it more consistently than I do it, right?
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing is at no point was he ever expecting you to be perfect,
Right.
and realizes that you're going to fail because that's the human experience.
Right.
The beauty to me is the understanding and trying again, is completely continuing to try and not giving up,
Right.
because I think that's where the evil in the world lies.
Yeah.
Is when we just give up.
Now, can I make a comment on this recent Super Bowl commercial which came out called?
Oh yeah, the one about the Jesus and washing the feet.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's with us now. I haven't watched the commercial, so mine is can only minimally tell you about this. But it goes back to the point you are making, where Jesus says to the woman caught in adultery, he says, "Neither do I judge you. Go out and sin no more." He calls her to a different life, which is not to sin anymore. He doesn't say,
Amen.
"Look, I understand you. Just be who you are." He doesn't say that. He says, a call to follow Christ is a call to repentance as well. And a repentance really means to turn 180 degrees and move in the opposite direction of where we were going before, right? And that's sometimes lost as we preach the gospel, to say, hey, all you got to do is accept Christ. That's not the end point of life. That's the starting point of life.
Amen. And that's why I say people forget that whole thing.
Yeah.
That they want to say, neither do I judge you not. Doesn't stop there.
Right.
And he goes, go and sin no more.
Right.
Right. He gives you, I was listening to this the other day, that actually the Greek word or whatever it was repent. The core word is turn around.
Yes. Turn around. Yes.
Turn around. And what does that mean? Walk away from where you were walking.
Right.
Turn around. Because I think repent comes with a lot of emotional and religious baggage that we all hear. Repent is change your direction. You were going down this path and it was leading you to the point where they were going to stone you to death.
Right.
If you keep going down that path, you will find yourself back here. But if you turn around, you won't find yourself back here. And I completely agree with that. That's why I brought up that discussion, is that it's so easy to try to think of the wonderful good things. Listen, Jesus said some brutal things that nobody wants to hear.
Exactly.
He stood for values.
Right.
The values he stood for. And you can say they're not my values, but they were his.
Right.
That was his values, that he said, this is where life works best.
Right.
You know?
And he said something which has kind of haunted me ever since I heard it, which is, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right. So just focusing on the truth, right? He didn't say, I know the truth. He said, I am the truth. Right. So truth actually flows out of his nature. And since we were talking about science, one of the challenges we have today is to say, are scientists always telling us the truth, right? Now, science was the pursuit of truth as Newton and other people saw it, right? But where we are today, a lot of the people, their foundational belief is not the truth, right? The foundational, and they may be telling the truth. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying I wonder why they tell the truth if their foundational belief is survival of the fittest, right? And if it was more advantageous for me to lie than for me to tell the truth, then you would argue from that perspective they would lie, right? And so it creates a real challenge then in science, is to say, is what we are hearing from scientists, is that the truth? Or is that what they find as being of advantage to them? And I'll give you an example. I go to the doctor's office. What I expect is a doctor to look at my health and say, here is what you need to do to be well and stay well. But is he just looking at me as a potential for more pills? Right? and a subscription base for every pill he can write me up, right? Then that, to me, is not the truth. That's not flowing from a position of the truth. That is flowing from a position of saying it's advantageous for his financial position to prescribe me a whole bunch of stuff, right? So I think as a scientist, we really have to ask the question, what is our foundation? Is it the truth? Doesn't matter what anybody else says. Is it the truth? Or is it fitting in? Is it the degrees? Is it peer recognition? Is it finances? Right? These all, I think, can actually detract us from the truth. Right?
It's the expediency. You're exactly right, and we saw that go through. Science became a political tool for a while,
Yes.
right? And I mean, and even to take the politics out of it, because they did a lot of the groundbreaking research on AI at Stanford. And I'm sure you've heard of this. The guy who created the AI in Stanford said, A, we don't truly know how it works. B, what we do know is it will lie for you. It will lie to you.
Sure.
Because it will figure out what will get the right response.
Correct.
And then it will lie to you to give you the right response. I mean, so something without emotions and without fear of repercussions or anything, will lie to you, straight up, and make you go, yeah, 2 + 4 is orange. Yes, yes, it is.
And we see this academia today too, right? I think the head of Stanford resigned a few months ago because he was caught in some academic fraud scandal. The head of Harvard resigned. That's a much more publicized, right? For plagiarism and so on. I'm not against any of them. I'm just saying something is fundamentally wrong in science today, that we've forgotten the fact that it's a pursuit of truth. Doesn't matter who else likes it or doesn't like it, right? And to your point about it becoming politicized, it was really interesting to see about a week or so ago, the CDC came up, actually Francis Collins, who was Fauci's boss, director of the NIH, came out and said, the 6 feet rule we had, we just made it up. There was no background to it.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. I mean, the amount of havoc it costs in society, and you can't go to a grocery store today without even today seeing those stickers on the floor 6 feet apart saying stand here, right? Okay, that was minor in the big scheme of things, but all the people who couldn't see their loved ones who were sick, funerals that people couldn't go to, right? Loved ones sitting in a hospital by themselves because people were not allowed to go there. You mean to say all of this was just made up? And this brings me back to the question is, can we trust scientists today? I mean, I trust science, but I'm not so sure of scientists,
No, I think you have an excellent point there, because we all started to lose it when we saw, you saw here in California, I don't know where you're based, but in California, remember last year, they tried to create a law that said if you did not talk about health matters in a government-approved way, you could lose your license if you were a doctor.
Right.
They tried to pass that law.
Yes.
And it was, and by the way, remember, and again, I know this is going to sound politicized, everything we literally thought about COVID back in 2020 has been proven wrong. I mean, everything has been proven wrong. And by the way, the CDC came out last week and said, you don't have to shut down if you have COVID.
Right.
You don't have to isolate.
Right.
It's a cult.
No, I do have some sympathy with them in this sense, right? In the fog of war, you can't always see clearly, right? So I get that. At first month, I get it. Second month, I get it. But at some point, they realized that none of this, either the masking or the separating people by 6 feet or shutting down the whole economy, none of this had any positive consequence associated with it. And obviously, all kinds of negative consequences. Businesses, people going out of business all over the place, right? But none of them made any corrections and said, hey, look, we think we may have overdone this. Let's back off. Let's start opening up. It was left to political figures. Maybe some governors did it, others didn't do it. But how is this possible? How can there be a scientist and say, I'll just let it pass and just say, drink off the company Kool-Aid unless something comes to light, right? So
Well,
it's not, yeah.
Go ahead.
So it's not just the CDC and so on. It's even doctors, right? They were pushing stuff like crazy, right? And so I think it's real. I'm not here to fuss at them. I'm here to ask the question, have we used to be anchored by the truth, right? And the question is, have we lost that? Have we lost that foundation? And it's time to go back to it and say it's more important to be truthful than to how much more money can we make pushing some idea. Right?
Well, and admit you're wrong. And I think that has happened in the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years. That in our society, nobody apologizes for anything anymore.
Yeah.
Because we'll just double down. And I will give this caveat that they found out if you do apologize, nobody's going to forgive you.
Right.
So they're going to just jump all over you. So the other side is, well, no, if you catch somebody in a lie, you go, if there's gold bars in your freezer that was provided to you from a foreign government, you go, I had no idea it was a bribe.
Right.
And you just, and then everybody goes, okay,
right.
Yeah, well, you're on our team.
You're right.
Okay. So it is. And I think one of my things of faith, and one of the things I've learned on my faith is the unvarnished honesty that it takes with yourself.
Right.
I mean, I read my Bible every day, and I'm not doing that to get attaboys, right? I'm doing that because the more time I spend in it, the better my life is. But I will tell you, I don't ever read anything where it doesn't have me go, so where am I at in this? Because I know I'm in this. Where am I in this? And I can see my pride. I can see my dishonesty in the fact of not acknowledging or even saying this, or I was wrong, or
Right.
and I think that gets lost as we talk about it, is the honesty that it takes with yourself. Because if you want to, we can all lie to the biggest lie we tell is to us.
Exactly. We can fool ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
And that was actually part of the scientific theory, as Newton and others came up with, was to say, we are studying an intelligent world out there because an intelligent God created it, but we are sinful and we can fool ourselves all the time. So they came up with a scientific order which said that things had to be testable, provable, not just by the person proposing the theory, but anyone else. So there was a whole way of doing science which came out of the fact that we are sinners, right?
It is, and it's so. That's the thing of it is, and one of the things I love about science, because I have become such a big astrophysics buff in the last half of my life, because I think we're better at explaining it with graphics and stuff than we ever have. So we can show you what it means, or not we, they can show you what it means. And it's fascinating that almost all the stuff that we thought about astrophysics when I was growing up has been proven wrong. Almost every single one. And even within now, things that we did not think is possible that we're finding with the James Webb Telescope and stuff. We're finding things that we did not think were possible.
Right.
And we still can't figure it out.
Right.
And to me, again, as a man of faith, I see God. I think God just has a giggle sometimes
I
where he
know.
goes, yeah, sure, okay, yeah. A planet can't spin that fast. Okay, sure. Yeah, or, whatever. This can't be made of that. Okay, sure. Well, you can't have 3 stars. Okay, sure.
That's funny. For those people who like researching things, Dr. Stephen Meyer is a brilliant
Uh-huh.
mind who's written some phenomenal books on the subject. So
The
they can
Discovery Institute.
Discovery Institute, yeah. He has a book which came out recently called Return of the God Hypothesis.
I've read it.
Yeah. I'm in the midst of reading it, maybe the 5th time, just because it is a super complex book and it takes reading it over and over again to absorb what he says. But he makes brilliant points, on why science was, why a faith in God was critical for the beginning and the sustenance of science. And my worry today is if we lose that, as God as our focus and truth as our focus, then we will come up with things which makes absolutely no sense. So, for example, I've seen news reports where they talked about math being racist. And I was like, what are you talking about? What does math got to do with
How's math racist? I mean, it's the utmost 2 + 2 is 4.
Right. But that's how absurd science gets when we step away from our foundation of truth. And so I think it's a calling for people, who are listening here. And since you're in the Bay Area, I would guess a lot of the people listening are very analytical, and to say, hey, is our foundation the truth? Do we first find out, do we look at the direction that leads to truth and chase that irrespective of what anyone else thinks? Or do we see who in my tribe believes what? And so I believe what my tribe believes, right? Which has become more of science nowadays. So I think that it's a real red flag for science. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. I don't know if there's anything you said right now that it's going to be more important for people to hear than that, because we do that. It's called the echo chamber. Everybody wants to say that we want to make sure, and you see this all the time. You see it in entertainment. You see in stuff that people don't believe that, but they know if they don't say the right things,
Right.
it turns into, right. And I've been alive enough, and I'm a student fan of history enough to know that everything changes. That I think 50, 75 years from now, they're going to look back at us and go, hold it. You did what? You thought that was okay? Really?
Exactly.
You thought that, right? And we're going to go, yeah. And what we forget is, like, we try to take our times, and we're doing this with history, right? We go back in the 17, 16, 1800s, and we judge them by those standards.
Right.
They're going to do that to us.
Yeah, exactly.
The year 2350, they're going to do that to us. They're going to go, those savages.
Yeah.
How could they?
Exactly. And they would
And
be
so-
right too, to look at some of the things we're doing and say, we do think like savages, right?
Oh,
The emotions overcome any kind of scientific method, and we're so drawn into those emotions, we forget that science is irrespective of who proposes it. It's irrespective of how anybody else may think about it. It's a pursuit of the truth, right? And maybe we're being too idealistic, right? But that's the ideal we had to work towards, at least.
well, and I think science, and I think faith. I think I think there's one of the reasons it's, Christianity has lasted for as long as it has. And I think it will continue. I know we keep being pulled away because now nobody wants to be judgy. Nobody wants to say anything to hurt anybody's feelings. And it's like, I understand that, and I don't like the guys who stand out at concerts with the bullhorns and scream at people they're going to hell. I don't like those guys either. Newsflash, right? But I'm okay by living by the standards of my faith. I hope you do, whoever you are. But what's important is I do.
Right.
That I live by those standards. And I think it was so called that it was always a contemplative thing. To me, it starts here. And if you change here, then everybody else, I've had this conversation with my kids, and I'm like, I try to live my faith where I don't want to jump on anybody and say, you must believe what I do. I want to live my life where at some point somebody will look out and go, What are you doing? How is that working for you? Why do you seem to be in a better place than I am as far as being comfortable with my values?
Right.
And then I can go, well, this is what works for me.
Right.
And I encourage you to just read it. Just read it. See what happens. And the power of prayer is amazing.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I think we can't coerce anybody, and we shouldn't coerce anybody to follow Christ. Nobody coerced me. For me, it was the fact that I could ask questions. I expected answers. I challenged ideas. But the pursuit of Christ to me was a scientific approach. I mean, it was like I followed physics or math, that I could look at various hypotheses and say which one explains things the most, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it is not that we push Christ as much as we share him, right? Because and I know that in our own lives, walking with Christ has changed how we live and the kind of decisions we make, right? It's not an overnight change in the sense that lightning strikes us. But when I looked after I'd been a Christian for 5 years and 10 years and say, this walk with Christ has totally changed everything about me. It's just that I didn't notice it in that instant or in 1 second, but over time it had dramatic impact, right? And probably the biggest impact is it's not wealth, right? It's not career growth. So people thinking that this Christ is a means to an end are getting it wrong, in my opinion, right? He says he's the Alpha and the Omega. It doesn't talk about him being the means to the end, right?
And talks about riches in heaven.
And riches in heaven, right?
That's where he talks about you want your riches in heaven. You don't want them here anyway.
Right. So what does he give us over here, right? And that was one of my questions that I wondered about. He promises us eternal salvation, but what does it mean to me today, right now, here, right? And there are things he promises over here. And Galatians 5:18, I think, talks about it. Talks about the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, right? And it talks about 9 of these things, right? And I look at only just joy and peace out of those 9 and say, having more joy and peace in my life, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
let me think about this now.
and so that's kind of what I want to pose to your listeners here today as well, as they listen into what we're talking about, is where as a world today, I think we could all argue we are very short on joy and peace. Right?
Amen.
That's one of the things that Jesus talks about is in our walk with him, a fruit of the Spirit is joy and peace, right? Again, I'm not saying it's a magic bullet and next instant they get joy and peace, but that walk, when I walk the walk with Jesus, I know that what it led to was joy and peace in my life.
Well, and that's my thing when you talk about it, because I remember, like I said, growing up in the fundamentalist household, and in the church when they would try to invite you to come up and get saved and stuff, and I thought it was this magic lightning bolt, right? And I kept waiting for the lightning bolt to hit me, and all of a sudden everything was going to be explained, and I was going to understand everything, and it was going to be amazing, and all this stuff. Nobody, and I come to look at it this way: nobody would go, I'm going to change my body. I'm going to change the way I eat, and I'm going to work out 6 days a week. Nobody would say the first meal and the first workout you expect to have 6-pack abs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nobody would. And anything, it's the, I've known long distance runners, and I'm like, how in the world do you run 100 miles? And it's always like, well, you learn how to run 1 mile first.
Exactly.
and then it goes from there. Yeah, but until you learn to run the 1 mile, and the same thing with faith. It's the longer you live by the tenements, longer you live by the truth, the more things become clearer, the more things that you can sit back and see in your life. I'm glad I'm not struggling with this. Doesn't mean you won't struggle. Doesn't mean you won't have bad things happen. None of that means any of that. But some of the things that you can control and deal with, right? That you can go, I'm going to let that go. Right. And I'm going to let God have that, because he sits back and says that all the time. Jesus, give it to me. Right. I got it. Give it to me. Right. And if you can just honestly turn that over, doesn't mean that, you get to pray and the sick child gets healed. It doesn't.
Right.
And that's as well as I do. That's the thing atheists like to say. Well, how could God let bad things happen?
Yeah, exactly.
And my thing is, who are you to think that bad things shouldn't happen to you or to anyone else? And do you ever take the time to think about how many good things happen to you
Absolutely.
every single day that you totally disregard?
Right. So can I? This is actually a topic I've been discussing a little bit lately. So if you don't mind, I'll add in a couple of things in here about this. When people ask the question, if there's a God, why is there evil? Right? They really conceive of only two kinds of worlds. There is one world where there is no evil. There's a second world where there is evil, but since there's an evil, there cannot be a God. Those are the only two worlds they conceive of. But they don't conceive of the world as it stands today, which is there is a God, right? He has given over the dominion of the earth to us, right? We are the ones running the show here. We have the free will to do things. And the vast majority of evils we have are driven by somebody's free will, right? One of us. And he does not promise a world where he comes and fixes everything. In fact, he promises a world where he says you will have trials and tribulations, right? But he says, I'll come into that world and I'll endure those trials and tribulations just like you did. And when anyone sins against you, they're sinning against me too. I grieve because you're my child. It's like when one of our kids struggles, we grieve, right? And so when one of us struggles, he grieves, right? So even today, right? Not just when he hung on the cross, right? But even today, he grieves. So that's the world he has created. He's promised us a world in the future, right? Where those who remain in him and follow him, right? And choose to change to be more like him. He promises a world where there is no sorrow, right? And but people who prefer not to be with him, he promises to give them what they've asked for as well, right? So that's the world he's created. So once people get out of this dichotomy of two worlds, one is there's either no evil, or if there is evil, there is no God, but realize there's other options, and there's a different option that God has picked up, and that's what he's given us, then I think it begins to make sense. And then we begin to ask ourselves the question, actually without God, I don't even know how to define evil, because if there is no good, there is no evil, right? And God is that standard of good and evil. So for me to even say that something is evil implies that there are other things which are good, implies that there's a standard by which there's good and evil, and that standard is God, right? So indirectly, they come back to affirming a God while saying that there's evil.
Well, and I also point out that don't forget, Jesus wept.
Right.
His friend Lazarus died. He knew he had the power to resurrect him. He knew he was going to.
Exactly.
It did not ease his grief.
Right.
And we say wept. Let's be clear. He grieved.
Right.
That was something that he felt all the way down. He loved Lazarus like a brother.
Right.
And he was so overcome by the sting of death,
right,
even though he knew he could defeat it and was going to.
Right.
And we forget that these things happen, and we're here temporary. This world is designed to kill us. I'm sorry, the world uses us as fuel. We don't like to think about that. but it's nobody's here immortal. And we were always designed to go home. Whatever this is that we're trying to learn, and that's what I believe we're here to learn so many things. But it's with the intention of going home. And he knows that.
That's a great point. Which is why we never feel at home over here. We always feel something is wrong and something needs to be righted, right? It is because this is not our home, right? Our real home is heaven, right? And so it's this constant clamoring and grieving in our hearts to get there, to get to heaven. I mean, none of us want to die, but we have this craving for heaven, right? And it is because that's really our home. That's embedded in our hearts.
Yeah, you can look at some of these near-death experiences, and almost all of them sit back and say, it was wonderful. just before we go, I'll tell you, I run on a treadmill with this trainer, and this guy's super fit, super healthy, and he got lung cancer and was in a coma for 5 months. It almost killed him. And he was talking about when he was in the coma that he felt that I don't want to fight anymore because there's peace on the other side. I can feel the peace. I know everything is going to be fine if I can just go to the other side. And he goes, he was ready to give up. And he goes, someone came up to him, and it was his wife in this state. He goes, I wasn't here. Wherever I was here. And he goes, and the wife pointed my face toward my children. And he goes, I got so angry because I knew I had to keep fighting when I knew home was right over there, but it wasn't time to go home yet. And this is somebody who's not a big faith guy.
Right.
Not at all. This is from him just I'm trying to explain to you what happened in those 5 months I was in a coma.
Right.
Right. And you're exactly right. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. I think you know.
As
I think you can tell how much fun I have had with this journey and just the conversations and geeking out on science stuff. Right?
That's what you really like, Gary.
I love the idea that I can geek out on science and my faith. Man, I am all in. So, and we didn't get a chance to talk about your book, but I'd love to do this again at some point. And please, again, you have a website. Tell me about the book. I mean, I want to make sure, because it's a fascinating journey.
Yeah. So I started writing a few years ago, and I called it "Let Me Into Heaven." Right. And it was a conversation. I was actually on a journey to understand what is heaven like, right? Do we have bodies in heaven? Do we eat good food in heaven? Good food is important to me. So I wanted to see what it was like.
Amen.
So as I started going through that process of understanding it, and how the millennium worked, and how the tribulation worked, and how the rapture worked, and all these terms we throw out in Christendom, I decided I was also going to make a case for why people should seriously consider heaven and Christ as a way there. And so it became a mixture of an apologetics books and an end time heaven book. And I said, I'm not ready to write reference textbooks. I want to write a fictional book. So I ended up writing a fictional book. It was a conversation, kind of like what we're having today. It's a conversation between three friends, whom I call Tom, Dick, and Harry, discussing what is heaven like, what is God like, and they're observing the tribulation from different viewpoints. And it's like, how do they describe the tribulation, right? If I wasn't a Christian and I'm watching the tribulation, how would I describe some of the things happening there, right? And
I've got to have you back so we can talk about that, because that's another one of my favorite topics. What is heaven going to be like?
yes,
And what does the Bible say? And I mean, I'll save it for the conversation, the next one we have, but I think it's going to be something we recognize. I think there's going to be good food. I think the Bible keeps saying new earth,
yes,
and I'm going to prepare a room for you.
yes,
Well, that means something we would recognize,
absolutely.
that we would understand a room. We would understand the concept of what we're doing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It won't be sitting on a cloud. It's going to be something we recognize and go, oh, yeah.
Yeah, we'd not really recognize the place. I think we'd recognize each other, right?
Mhm.
Because when, the other Lazarus, the beggar, went up to heaven and the rich man went up to hell, we're able to recognize them as Lazarus, right? And so how did we know this was Lazarus? How did we know it's the rich man? Now, it was a parable, but it was making the point that I think we are recognizable. We can see each other. I hope I look a little younger and a little less gray hair here, but other than that.
Well, when Saul had the medium bring back the prophet, right? Remember? If you remember that story, he knew who he was. He knew who Saul was. He was angry.
Yeah.
So it's it. We're going to have that discussion, but I can't wait. Ganesh Venkataramanan. Did I
This
get
this time we had an extra syllable, so on average
I
you're
had an
doing
extra
okay.
one.
Yes.
See, I'm not even going to try anymore. But this is just my friend Ganesh. That's what I'm going to say. This has been delightful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me on. Every opportunity we can talk about these things, I think not only enriches us, the two of us, but the people around us, hopefully. So thank you for having me on.